This video is meant to be a recording of what we covered as a practice in the first meeting of Pivot. And that's really the creation of this GitHub repo. Um, we created a local Git repo inside of the Linux virtual machine that's provided. This website, Construct Sim, which if you're watching this in some future time, you can create a free account on this site. Just gonna log in using Google. See, I just associated it with my Google account, but you can create an account how you like. And then um, normally, I'll close this to go from start to finish. Normally, this is your home page, and you would go to Learn on the bottom left, Courses, and then Linux for Robotics is where we started this week. So in this course, we created a Git repo. Once this loads, I'll just kind of talk through this while this loads. Um, so this platform would kind of serve as your local computer, kind of like if you were running your code on a laptop or desktop. And then GitHub serves as the cloud where you push your code to. Um, Maybe you've heard of software engineers talking about production code and wonder what they mean. It's just going to be this main branch. We'll talk about branches in a future workshop, but um, yeah, you're pushing your code to the cloud onto the main branch. And when I say push, I mean these two commits, history of commits on the main branch, are changes I made to my program that I saved locally and then sent to the cloud, and they're recorded. So I can always go back and see, what did I have at the time, what changed, what lines were added or subtracted. Um, I could see a code that represents like this point in time. And that way I have version control, which is the big concept of GitHub. I could go back to a previous version of software if, some functionality broke with some changes I made. I could work with a team and we can all kind of like store our changes and work together in parallel on programs. And then all of these changes get stored and managed on the cloud. That gives us a clean way to work. And for this first exercise, we just created this repo and we created a text file that contains some content and pushed that. I'll run through that process again here. You can see now that the course opened up. Um, if you're trying to play catch up, we went through these first three modules on the first week. But that's something you can go through and learn about. You could see that repo, my first Git repo, is just within the integrated development environment here. And that file.txt um, is right here. It's um, the same file that was on the Git repo on the cloud. Now I'm going to walk through the process of recreating that, um, and I'll change some of the names, just taking the opportunity to make this recording as the opportunity to create a repo that I have to create for this program anyways. So in order to follow the process of creating this Git repo, um, the first thing you want to do is, well, create a GitHub account, um, and then go to settings, go to developer settings, personal access tokens, tokens classic. You can see I have quite a few here. Let me delete this one for pivot. Understand delete token, and then let me generate a new one. I'm gonna generate a new token. Uh, whoops. Sorry, one second. This is just due to work. I have to authenticate when I take certain actions. And my GitHub account is tied. Work. It's just a temporary code. And so, um, what is this token for? Pivot. You could give it whatever name you like. These personal access tokens are going to serve as your password on other sites where you can't be authenticated. So you'll get like a custom key from that's generated by GitHub. I'm just gonna give it permission to do everything for now. Um, so I could use it throughout this program without really worrying about this, but you probably want to give this some more thought of what sort of permissions you want associated with a password that's floating around if you were um, working outside of this program. And I'll recreate this token after I'm done with this workshop, so can be used. So you'll see what it is. But you'll get a code once you generate that. You just copy it. I'll have a notepad floating around typically, or like a OneNote or somewhere where I could store these keys for my own personal use. If you ever lose them, you can delete them like you saw and just create another one. And so now I have a password to use whenever I want to work with GitHub. So we have profile, password we can use. We also want to create a repo. So you'll go to your account, go to repositories. You probably will have different things here. We go to new. We shouldn't have put this in the center of the screen. And for the owner, you'll see different groups in there if you're in any. Otherwise, you should just see the account you created for GitHub. Go to yourself, name the repo. Let me call this pivot ROS examples. Because this is a ROS repo I'm going to create for later. But you can name this my first Git repo if you're following along from before. I'll repeat those steps. You can add a description. It could be whatever you want. I'm gonna type one that's relevant to my repo. So ROS example code for demos used in Pivot workshops. And then you could choose the visibility. I'll just keep it as private for now. Um, I'll keep all these options off because I could just add them in later for simplicity. So now this repo called Pivot ROS Examples is on the cloud, but in order to add anything to it, I'm gonna have to create it locally as well. Um, I could follow creating a new one by just copying and pasting these commands, but I kind of want to create my local repo manually just to show that process in this workshop. And then I'll follow the steps on the bottom. So back to our work area, you had your IDE, now you have the terminal. And in the terminal, let's stay on this version. On the terminal, this is a Linux system. So throughout this Linux course, you'll learn how to navigate the terminal, but we'll go through several commands to let you create your Git repo. First is ls will let you view where you are. So you can see in the IDE, our root folder, well, that's probably not the right word, but our workspace, catkin underscore workspace, that folder is visible from the root here in the terminal. And ls lets us view what's in a folder, so we'll kind of practice that several times. You'll learn about these through the Linux course if you haven't already gone through it, but we need some of these commands to navigate and make a Git repo. So cd lets you navigate into a folder, and you'll see inside this folder is build, devil, my first Git repo, source might look different. ls lets you again view what's inside. So you could see those four folders in blue here. I'm going to type clear to kind of get some more space and not clutter the terminal with commands. Um, but if I wanted to create a directory or a folder, I type make directory, and then let's call this pivot Ross examples. Same as our GitHub repo. They don't have to be the same name. I'm just kind of doing that for continuity. Um, and then we can navigate into that. A nice thing to know once you're starting to get into these long bits of text to type, like pivot Ross examples, you could hit tab after typing in the first character or two. And if Linux detects that you have something in there that follows those starting characters, it'll just autocomplete for you. And so I'm going to pivot Ross examples, and there's nothing in here. So when I type, ls, let me see what's inside of this folder. Nothing's in there. So we want to create a Git repo in here. Clear, so you can view that. That's going to follow this sequence of steps. First, you're going to type git config, tag it with global user name, and then you type the username that you want to use locally. I suggest matching it to your GitHub username, just so you're following some continuity and not getting into some issues later with tracking changes or authentication. We're going to type git config global user dot email and type your email. Again, best option is the one you created your GitHub account with. But this is all local, so it's not associated with GitHub yet. And you could just track the changes without, like with a different username and email, if locally if you want. Um, versus your GitHub page, which is on the cloud. So you've configured Git to use that username and email, and any changes you make, those will be stated as like this person on with this email made these changes. And so now you can init your Git repo, initializing it. And that lets you start to make changes to it and save them on Git, and then eventually push those changes to the cloud. So at the point where we've initialized our repo, we can start using Git commands, git status. It'll tell us we're on the branch master and there's no commits. So let's get a commit. To do that, let's make a file. Let's say touch file.txt. It's one of the commands you'll learn in this Linux course. And then in that file.txt, you can see it in the IDE. We can type something we want. Hello world. We'll save that. And then let's check git status again. See what changed. So it gives us the same text on branch master, no commits yet, but it says, hey, there's these untracked files. It's showing that in red, this file.txt had some changes. So let me clear this to get some more terminal space. We can type git add file.txt. So we staged that change. And now it's staged and ready to be committed. So you can selectively choose which changes you want to stage. Um, and this git add file.txt, if there were more changes, you could also do git add period. And that would just stage all of your changes all at once. You don't have to type them out individually. I'll do that other method soon. But this file.txt is ready to be committed. So to do that, we type git commit dash m, the naming tag, and then we'll call it first commit. You could this is just this content inside of the quotes is just essentially what you want your commit to be saved as, so you can like read that later and know what's going on. What changes did you make? So these are committed. Um, so now when we check status, we'll see we're on the branch master. Again, it's back to saying there's no changes, working tree's clean. If we check, let me clear so this can be more readable. If we check the git, not like use a new command, git log, we'll see that's the commit we made. Like I mentioned earlier, that config that you did earlier for your username and your email are apparent there. They're associated with the commit you made. And the date, like timestamp, is also stored, and that description first commit. Um, and it's pointing the head at master because that's basically saying this is where your local code is. This is the version. Commit this tag is the version of the program that you're currently on because the head is pointing to it. Um, now, let's say you want to get this code to the cloud. Several things need to happen first. Copy and paste these commands. First is adding the origin of the remote. So paste that, git remote add origin. The Then this is just the location, like the web link for that Git repo. Next thing is you'll notice branch main is used in GitHub. So earlier when I talked about the production code branch, it was called main. And locally, you know, it's called master, as you've seen before. I type git status on branch master. This is just an artifact of how Git as a system was originally created by a different person than GitHub, which is kind of the cloud service for code version control. And so they're named differently, and kind of one thing to get them to work together cleanly is going to be to rename the branch master as main locally. So once you're on that line, check its status, and you're on branch main. So its master just became main. And the last thing to run is this git push command, and you'll use git push quite a bit. Here we're setting up the origin of this push to be um, main at this web link. It's the main branch. You eventually, when we move into branches, you'll see that you can set it to other branches, not just main. And so we're going to push changes. And this is where it'll ask you for your GitHub username and that pat personal access token password that we created earlier. So don't use your actual password. If it doesn't work here, it's because of some authentication issues, which is why you created that pat. Um, we're using personal access tokens in this pivot program because changes you make to associate, if you're familiar with GitHub more, you can associate an SSH key with GitHub, and that way you don't have to be typing these passwords every single time. But any changes you make to this Linux virtual environment associated with the actual environment or like those SSH keys isn't persistent. So, um, you'd have to do it every time you log in, and that kind of defeats the purpose. Um, so we'll just use the personal access tokens. But there you go. So now we go back to GitHub and we just refresh the page. Um, you'll see that file.txt. It says hello world, and you'll see we have one commit. And if we check that commit history, you'll see it's just that first commit message that we associated with the work we did on the local repo. So this is a big step, and just to kind of prove that this workflow continues, let's say I add my name is um, Sam, and so save that change. And you could imagine this could be like a Python file or a package manager set of files, or however you want to imagine your code, rather than just a text file, but this is just a practice. If I check the status, you'll see, okay, there's been some changes. I can add them. I'm going to use that period so you can see it in action. You don't have to type file.txt. You could just put a period. You'll see it's staged now. You can git commit m for your message. I'll say text added to file, and then check the status again. I should tell you that there's actually, now that we've associated GitHub, it'll tell you, hey, you're ahead. Like you've done more work locally than the cloud has. The cloud is behind your current saved state. And you could see that even more when you go to the Git log. And I'm gonna type this tag one line just to make it less verbose. But you can see locally the head is pointing to my local main branch. Um, and it's green. And then this origin main, origin/main is the cloud main branch. And that one is at first commit, so it's one commit behind. And so let's say we want to get it to the cloud. Let's say git push. You don't have to retype u origin main because you already configured that it's going to the origin and to the main branch. But you may change that command, and it's good to know if you're going to push to another branch, which we'll do in future workshops. So we'll get that pat, we'll get push those changes. And now when we refresh our GitHub page, oh, look at that. There's two commits. And if we go to the file, there's our changes. And if you go to the commit history, you'll see the same tags from earlier on the logs. And if you go to first commit, you can go to previous commits and see what the code was then, see what changed, right? So one line changed here. If I go to the second commit, you know, hey, some more things changed, right? Cool. And that brings us to the end of the GitHub workshop. Um, thank you for joining. Thank you for participating in this program. If you have any questions, I think this will be posted to YouTube, so you can either reach me directly if you have access to that, or leave a comment. And yeah, the next GitHub's workshop, we'll go through what these branches actually are and how they're used in software development. Just continue to associate that with the work we're doing in these courses. So push your changes, your notes, your Python code, your C++ code to your GitHub. Um, we'll also have some videos on Rust that I'll separate out for the sake of time. So yeah, thank you.